it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video, I'm really excited to chat through everything, but essentially it came to me when I woke up this morning and realized I have not been filming my quarterly top books of the season videos. So because of that, this is kind of my catch-up version of that. I'm gonna be chatting through my top 5 books of the year, as well as every single book I've read so far in 2020. So generally speaking, these formats I do quarterly, but because I forgot this is going to be kind of a bi-yearly view, and then we'll go back to quarterly later this year. This year has been my strongest reading year by a lot compared to the last few years. So far, as of today, filming this video, I have read a total of 48 books. So needless to say, lots of books to pick from. I've also read a lot of incredible books this year, and it was very hard to narrow down, but I have done it. So without further ado, let's dive into this video. I'm first just going to quickly show off every single book I have read with a star rating. If you want more information on my thoughts, I'll have different wrap-ups down below where you can kind of check back if you're interested. I'm trying to do these in some sort of chronological order, so I'm going to start with the books I read in January and end with the most recent books I've read. But anyway, let's start with the books I read in the beginning of the year. First off, we have Jonathan Strange and Miss Norrell, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfeld, which I gave a 4.25 out of 5 stars. Next is The Assassin's Apprentice, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, which I gave 4 stars. The Starless Sea, which I gave 5 stars. Then is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I gave a 4.5 stars. A Heart So Fierce and Broken, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Romanoffs by Simon Sebag Montefiore, which I gave a 4 stars to. Things in Jars, which I also gave a 4 stars to. The first book in the Inheritance trilogy, which is The 100,000 Kingdoms, which I gave a 4.5 stars. Devil in the White City, which I think I gave a 4.5 or 5 stars. And then lastly, The City of Dreaming Books, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I have Bringing Down the Duke, which I gave a 4.25 stars to. Then The Queen's Poisoner by Jeff Wheeler, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This was so entertaining. Next is Red Notice by Bill Browder, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Then I have Killers of the Flower Moon, which I gave 3.75 out of 5 stars. Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. I am trash for this new series. It's been said, I'll say it again, trash. Trash. All right, moving on to a period of time where I read a lot of romance on my e-reader. The first one is The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And I read The Governess Game, also by Tessa Dare, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. And lastly, The Wallflower Wager, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. These are all part of the same series. Romance, historical romance, big fan of all 3. I also read The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, which I gave a 3.5 stars. Most Likely, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And then I read Dangerous Alliance, which I gave a 3.5 stars. Book 2 to the Inheritance trilogy, The Broken Kingdom, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. Probably my favorite in the whole trilogy. Probably one of my favorite N.K. Jemisin books, but it was so good. Yeah, so I read that. And I also read Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which I gave 3 stars. Next, I read The Guest List, which I gave 3.75 stars. Also read Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett, which I gave 5 stars. I also read the final book in the Inheritance trilogy, which is The Kingdom of Gods, which I gave a 3.75, 4 stars. Burn by Patrick Ness, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Eve's Daughter by Jeff Wheeler, which I gave a 4.25 stars. Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Edenbrook, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Romancing the Duke and When a Scot Ties a Knot, both part of the same series, which I gave both of them 3 stars, 2.75 stars. Sort of situation. And then also Full Moon, which is book 2 to the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Is Akatowicz by Nnedi Okorafor, which I gave 4.5 stars. And I have A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow, which I gave 3.75 stars. Next, I also have White Rage and White Fragility, both I did not give a star rating. I have A Song of Race and Ruins by Roseanne A. Brown, which I gave a 4.5 stars. The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars to. And the home stretch, I promise. Next we have Grave Peril by Jim Butcher, which I gave 2.75 stars. Then we have So You Want to Talk About Race, which I also did not give a star rating, which is my practice for anti-racism nonfiction. Then I have The Poppy War, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. This blew me away. I loved this book. I have The Silence of Bones by June Her, which I gave 4 stars. And lastly, I have Anna K, which I gave 3.75 stars to. Alrighty, so those are all of the books I've read so far this year, and now I'm gonna talk about my top 5. Before I jump into my top 5 though, I'm just gonna quickly say I'm not gonna feature The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which is probably the best book I've read so far this year because I've already mentioned that it is in a previous video, and I wanted to highlight 5 different books. But all that is to say, if you haven't read this book yet, please check it out. Please read N.K. Jemisin. Her other trilogy that I featured in this video is on that list, which I'm gonna start with because she is one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time. On that note, let's start with the first book I'm gonna talk about in my top 5 books of the year, which is the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I've read the entire thing of this so far this year, and I really loved it. This is a fantasy story that follows different main POVs throughout each novel, but inherently all the stories are very much connected. This is a story about gods, it's about magic, it's about power, it's about people, and it is just so well done. Also, throughout each of the books, I feel like N.K. Jemisin kind of takes different lenses on this topic. We have a really focused view within the second one, we have a really pulled out kind of higher political view in the first one, and then kind of a mix between the perspectives of gods and humans within the third one. All in all though, this is just a really well conceptualized fantasy trilogy that blew me away. Kind of give you an idea of what this book is about. The first one follows our main character who's essentially traveling back to sort of the capital of the 100,000 kingdoms. There's essentially this singular family that rules over this entire fantasy world for the most part with an iron fist. They do not allow any uprising, they control everything, and the reason why they're able to do that is because they have 3 gods within their capital enslaved, and they basically use the threat of their power to keep everyone else in line. We follow our main character who is traveling back to this capital because she discovers that she is actually an heir to take over for this family. But when she arrives, she basically realizes that she's sort of this political pawn because there are actually 2 other individuals that are vying for power. And her grandfather, who she just recently found out even existed, really called her back as sort of a revenge element against her mother, who fled this kingdom when she was younger. So in the first one, we really follow our main character as she's kind of uncovering and trying to survive cutthroat politics, as well as befriending and working with these different gods that are present within this kingdom. Again, this is truly a trilogy that really looks at the connections between gods and humans, as well as the contrasts of gods and humans, which I really love. I love fantasy that sort of explores the fixed nature of a god and the dynamic nature of a human, and how those 2 things can really come to an explosive head. And again, this trilogy really explores all of those things. There's a lot of persisting characters throughout this trilogy, but again, each book kind of focuses on a different main character, but is always kind of present within this major city capital as well. But yeah, I loved reading this trilogy. It was so good. I would highly recommend it. And there's this awesome bind-up that just has everything right here for you. So there you go. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is simply just one of the prettiest books I've ever read, and it was such a joyful and sorrowful reading experience because I just loved reading it. Just how beautiful Erin Morgenstern's writing is just something that personally really appeals to me. I love flowery writing. I love a fantasy novel that kind of twists and turns and sometimes doesn't even make that much sense, but the ride of getting there is so extraordinarily beautiful. It's just something I love. I just felt like I just fell into this book and did not want to leave. But this is a story that basically follows some sort of secret society. Our main character, who is a graduate student, he is just studying and just researching within the library, and he stumbles across this book that's full of all of these different tales that he realizes is actually a scene to his own life. So this sets him off on an adventure to try to figure out what in the world is this secret society, how is there an image from his own life printed within this book, and he discovers sort of this world of keys, bees, and swords, and this underground place that's sort of protecting the history of books and things. Really beautiful, it's magical, it has a lovely romance at its center. It's just this magical tale that's gonna absolutely sweep you away. It's a book I also feel like I'm going to reread a lot. And it's honestly, again, I can't reiterate enough, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I really want to read The Night Circus by the same author because I hear that book's even more beautiful, but I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it. Next, I'm gonna mention Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare because this book was such a blast to read that I feel like I have to put it in my top 5 because it is exactly what I wanted it to be and more. This also kind of, in my opinion, spurred my whole historical romance moment that I had this year as well, because I was eating up the romance that was present in this. Like, it was served to me on a silver platter. But this is the first book to a new trilogy set in Victorian England, I want to say, or not, sort of that, like 1800s England. I don't know who was a ruler at the time, but there was lots of propriety and dresses and walks in the park. So the reason why I loved this novel so much is I feel like it had all the elements that we like in a Shadowhunters novel. It had action, it had adventure, it had demons, it had swordplay, all of that. But what it also had was all of the propriety and absurdity of the existence that this book is set in the time period. And those two things mixed together just like turn up the knob on the angst to just the nth degree. And because of that, I just could not put this book down. And Cassandra Clare constantly thinks of ways to keep characters apart, and I just eat it up. I love it. I can't wait for the next book in this series. I loved all the characters. I also love that there's so many references to past love series too. So all those things I just feel like made this such a fun book to read. I love that there's Carsters. I love that there's Herondales. I love everyone already. Yeah, for all those reasons, I had to include this in my top 5 because I just loved it and I can't wait for more, and I loved all the characters and the romance and the angst and all of it. So yeah, Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. It's a winner. I've been reading these books for so long. Still a winner. Next book I'm gonna mention was definitely a recent read, but one that has left such an impact on me and one that I feel like I'm gonna be talking about so much on my channel, and that is The Poppy War. So this is a book I have been putting off for so long, and I'm so mad at myself for it, but regardless, I've now since read it. This is also, I would say, a pretty divisive novel. I feel like some people love it. I'm definitely in the camp that love it, and some people don't particularly enjoy it, and it's mostly because, from what I can tell from reviews, is because there is a pretty big shift from part 1 to part 2. I'm personally in the camp that that shift only makes part 2 shine even more because there's such a contrast in reality, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So this is a story that is set in a time period that's inspired by the Sino-Japanese War, the Song Dynasty in China, as well as influenced by Opium War. So it has a lot of historical influences that really shine through within this story. We follow our main character, Rin, who in the beginning of this novel is essentially trying to escape being married off as well as escaping poverty. So she tests into this exam that essentially, if you score well, you can get into various educational and higher level occupations within her empire. She tests exceedingly well, which allows her entrance into a very prestigious military academy. However, when she arrives there, instead of it being kind of the sanctuary she was hoping it would be, she's quickly ostracized for being poor, for being a woman, for having a darker complexion than all the other students there. However, she keeps her head down, she studies and works really hard, and she also discovers that she has the ability to tap into a specific type of magic. All of these things kind of make her an excellent student, an excellent soldier. So when the second half of this novel happens, which is war, we really see her kind of at the forefront of it. This is a grimdark fantasy novel, which I really want to emphasize. This is an adult fantasy novel that is very dark, full of a lot of different trigger warnings, and I really feel like the author is trying to explore the dark realities of war and the cycle of violence that exists, and also how people can be shaped and molded by it. The first half of this book is definitely a school setting, while the second half, as I said, is a war setting. The split between the two is so powerful because it shows such a contrast, conflict, and a lot of the grudges and dislikes that she has against her fellow classmates, she realizes in the second half of the novel, really don't matter in the scheme of just trying to survive. And seeing Rin kind of grapple with that and also re-examine a lot of her relationships with various characters at the second half of this book was awesome. Also, the writing style was amazing. Also, the plot was so explosive and fast-paced. Also, this book is very, very dark, very disturbing, and again, is really focusing on the realities of warfare, which I have a lot of respect for. It was excellent. I can't wait for book 2. I'm gonna be reading it very, very soon. Yeah, I loved this book. So read it if you haven't already. And the last book I'm going to talk about in my top 5 is Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett. Robert Jackson Bennett is also one of my favorite authors. I feel like he's able to write political fantasy so so well. This is political fantasy, but also heist fantasy, and I just loved every second of it. This is obviously book 2 to a trilogy. The first one, we're basically following our main character, who is a thief. She lives in a world that's pretty much controlled by giant merchant houses, and the magic system is kind of like coding. You can kind of rewrite the world around you and trick it in behaving a different way, like making walls stronger or weaker, making water flow in different directions, stuff like that. In the first book, our main character basically steals an impossible artifact and she's kind of thrown into the center of politics. The second novel, which was excellent, kind of takes a look at what happened in the first one, escalates it by about ×10, and they have to deal with the fallout of basically tearing down one of the economic powerhouses in their city. And also I feel like this book sets the stage for a more global fantasy experience. So this is really set in Foundry side for the most part, but I feel like the third one is going to be looking beyond, and I cannot wait. This has explosive action as well as just a really well thought out plot that's going to trick you, in my opinion. It has humor and also it has incredible characters at its core. You love and cherish everyone who is around our main character Sansia, and you just love them. And there's also a great female-female relationship. Just so many things about this book are incredible. I loved this second installment, 5 out of 5 stars. So good. Please read this series because it's amazing. Alrighty guys, so those are the top 5 books I've read so far this year, as well as all the other books I've read as well. Again, I will have a bunch of wrap-ups down below if you're curious on having more in-depth thoughts on any of the books I didn't feature in my top 5. So many amazing books. It's gonna be hard to narrow down to a top 10 later this year, but regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you soon with another one soon.